In 1871, this institution was founded by the church that is now known as the United Church of Christ. Our values mirror those of the church, and we're blessed to enjoy an active, dynamic relationship with the UCC. Tonight, we're deeply grateful to virtually host Reverend Blackmon, Associate General Minister of Justice and Local Church Ministries from the national offices of the UCC. We only wish we could host her here on campus. Her topic tonight, after the elections, our common work as a society, is both timely and compelling. She joins a long list of national UCC guests we have hosted over the years, beginning with the Reverend Bernice Powell Jackson. We are pleased tonight to be partnering with the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ and their conference minister, Reverend Molly Carlson. It's a joy to have Reverend Carlson joining us this evening as well. Before Reverend Carlson speaks, it's my pleasure to introduce one of our great students, Raven Rhone. Raven is the president of the Black Student Union, and she would like to bring greetings on behalf of the student body. Thank you for joining us tonight, and a special thanks to you, Reverend Blackmon. Raven?
Hello, everyone. My name is Raven Rhone. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am from Austin, Texas. And I'm currently a junior studying biochemistry as my major. In addition to that, I am currently the president of Black Student Union here on campus. We are so honored to host the Reverend Traci Blackmon tonight, who is nationally known for her work in building a more just and ordered society by working with young people in the Black Lives Matter movement. Our mission as the Black Student Union is to inform, encourage, and strengthen the unity of our Black and African American students on campus, as well as create an engaging and informative space for allies. As BSU, we want to make a welcoming, engaging, relatable, and informative environment for those seeking to learn how to respect and accept those despite race, religion, gender, creed, or sexual orientation. Now, I know navigating this social climate hasn't been easy. We've been through a lot of historical events, and while it hurts us personally, that the color of our skin is the reason we are treated in an unjust way, we must work together with friends and allies alike, with the strategy and a plan for a more just future. Now, it is my pleasure to invite the Reverend Molly Carlson, Conference Minister of the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Raven. As Raven said, I am the Reverend Molly Carlson. I am the Conference Minister for the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ. And as a conference, we're honored to show up and to celebrate a very long, historic, and currently active, meaningful relationship with Elmhurst University. There is a rich history of engagement with the United Church of Christ and Elmhurst University, and we're so glad for that to continue to unfold. Tonight's lecture, we are so privileged to have Traci Blackmon with us. Traci is, as introduced, the Associate General Minister for Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ. She has an impressive resume, an amazing bio, but more than that, she has a pastor's heart, a healer's spirit, and a passion for justice. She will be on the line, and she will speak truth to power every time and around every corner. She has a remarkable track record of incredible works, and she is a prophetic leader of the church generally. And we're so grateful that she is a leader within the United Church of Christ. So tonight I present Traci Blackmon, and I look forward to all you have to share with us.
Thank you so much to my colleague, Molly Carlson. It is indeed an honor to be in your conference with you. And thank you, Raven, for your kind words, and kudos to all that you are making happen on that campus at Elmhurst. And to President Aiken, thank you very much for the rich invitation to be here. And that bit of history I did not know about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That means that the Spirit is indeed working, because my address opens with a quote from Dr. King tonight, and how fitting it is that we can all imagine that we are in that wonderful chapel. I see some familiar faces. Karen, it's good to see you. One of the blessings of Zoom is that you get to see people up close and personal, and I'm grateful for that. I've also learned that Zoom has limited capacity for attention paying when you have someone just talking at you like a talking head. So I plan to speak with you maybe about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll open up for conversations, which I hope my dear friend Scott is going to assist us with. And we'll have a delightful hour together from the comfort of your homes. How is that in this snow and cold weather? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his book, Where Do We Go From Here?, the following words: "Nothing could be more tragic than for men to live in these revolutionary times and fail to achieve the new attitudes and the new mental outlooks that the new situation demands." He goes on in that particular chapter to tell the story of Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, who slept for 20 years. But rather, it wasn't so much that he slept for 20 years that Dr. King wanted to focus on, but rather that he fell asleep under the reign of King George, and he woke up with George Washington in control. Rip Van Winkle slept through the revolution. Life as he knew it completely changed while he slept. And in many ways, although it has not been a revolution, I feel like we've had some pretty significant Rip Van Winkle moments in our nation. We slept while the previous administration dismantled the National Security Directorate at the White House that was charged with readying this nation for pandemics. We slept while that same administration removed us from the Paris Agreement on Climate in 2017. We were asleep as the previous administration rolled back not one, not two, but 125 climate and environmental protection policies. We collectively were asleep. We were asleep as our country amassed more than 65,000 asylum seekers languishing at the US-Mexican border, awaiting a hearing in the US. We were asleep as over 5,500 refugee children were forcibly separated from their parents as punishment for seeking the American dream. We slept as that dream became a nightmare for more than 500 children whose parents still have not been found. While we slept, trans rights were rescinded in the military, marriage equality rights were threatened, the Affordable Care Act was further weakened, the guarantee of reproductive rights for women was brought under new attacks, and our entire federal judiciary was reshaped by the lifetime appointment of 3 Supreme Court justices and 226 judges to the federal bench. That's 25% of the courts that get the final say in US politics, setting precedents that can shape this country for years to come. And as troubling as all of this is, what concerns me more is the widening chasm between so many that is fueled by a growing hatred for the other. The widening racial divide in this country, the widening economic gap, the widening gender gap, and sadly, even the widening religious divide. As of this morning, my friends, 571,000 people have died from COVID. 571,000. I see that some of your faces are surprised by that number. We have lost more lives to COVID than World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined. And we lost them all just in the span of a year. We lost them because we were not equipped to confront the virus when it arrived here. We lost them because we spent many, many months denying that the virus was a real threat. We lost them because our hospitals were overextended, because COVID lived at the intersection of race, class, oppressions. We lost them because of age and of our slow response. That's a lot of people that whenever we come back together, we will be missing. And over this year, because of the dangers of the virus, we've been forced to be socially distanced and isolated. And for some of us, that has meant that we've been alone, without the gift of human touch in the ways that we are accustomed to being touched. And certainly all of our rituals, all of our burial rituals, our marriage rituals, our baptismal sacraments, our communion sacraments as community gathered have had to be suspended for the sake of trying to preserve lives. We are in a place that one election will not fix. And when we look at this election, this particular election, we have to acknowledge that there is a great divide in this country that has gone beyond the wearing of red and blue, that has gone beyond the declaring of Republican and Democrat, that is way beyond anything that we can recognize as being a part of a democracy where we can disagree with one another, where we can champion our opinions without denigrating and demonizing the other. This is where we are. And although many of us have tried to deny it, after January 6th, it is undeniable. So the question is, what do we do? What do we do as people who love this country? What do we do as people who fight for justice? What do we do as people of faith, whatever faith that might be, to begin to try to bring our nation back together across these chasms that have been formed, let me be clear, not just because of the former president, for these actions would not have been possible by one man alone. But this is the result of dis-ease, of hatred, of discomfort, of disgust that has been simmering for years and finally found a way to be released. How do we come back from a ledge that would decide, even in religious circles, that God must be either a Republican or a Democrat when God is neither? That God must be a Christian and not affiliated with any other form of faith when God is not that either? This is the question you have posed to me, and it is a question that I also will pose for you. There are certain ways that I think we certainly must begin to make our way back to one another. And as a part of clergy, as a denominational leader, for me, a lot of that is in religious space. What grieves me most is that we as people of faith have failed to have grace for one another, have failed to create space for people to worship freely, for us to have our opinions and our ideas without them being demonized or considered antithetical to the gospel. It has been a hard road. And I think that a part of the responsibility of a people of faith now is to model what it is to have courageous conversations with one another that allow space to hear one another and not make assumptions. I certainly have been trying to do that last week. Believe it or not, I did a panel discussion with 4 evangelicals and me. I didn't know how that was going to turn out, especially because all 4 were 4 male evangelicals, 2 white evangelicals and 2 Black evangelicals, if that matters. And then here is the United Church of Christ. But you know what? I suggested that we start with some ground rules, and I'm going to suggest them here because the reality is we're in a country where 74 million people voted for things to stay as they were, even though I listed off those things for you. And one of the ways that I think that we have to begin to make our way back to one another is being able to have courageous conversation with those with whom we disagree. That means being able to listen to one another, to ask one another the question, where does it hurt? And how can we address the hurts that have been lingering and festering for far too long? I want to talk about that first, and then I'm going to talk about policy agenda. No matter what one's faith is, no matter even if one is not one that professes a designated faith, but has a moral compass, we all have a system of values. Every belief has a system of values. Some people call them morals. Some people call them commandments. But whatever they are, we have a system of values that we live by. And in all of those systems of value, there are words, there is framing that lifts up the dignity of all humanity. There is a guide for us to be able to look at one another, not just at the actions we do, but at the fact that we are all created in the image of the divine, and begin to have the difficult conversations. Yes, in politics, and yes, in the halls of Congress, but also at our dinner tables and with our family members, to try to understand what it is that is causing the rift between us. I think that you will find that many times it is a misinterpretation, a mislearning of history, and a misinterpretation and a mislearning of this moment. For those of you who are familiar with me, you may know that I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, when the alt-right rally happened. I was there at the invitation of people who lived in Charlottesville. They asked me to come and to preach and to do the rally prior to the Saturday march that was scheduled. So I arrived Friday morning. It was a very different kind of place, even though I had been in Ferguson. There was much more security, private security that had been hired for Charlottesville. And I was wondering why, what is going to happen, what's going on. They secured a whole hotel for us to stay in and bought all the rooms so that no one else could be there because they were afraid of danger. I really thought they were overreacting at the time. I'd been in Ferguson for 369 days, and I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in the middle of the civil rights movement. I'd watched Ku Klux Klan march down the street. I wasn't afraid to go to Charlottesville. They picked us up and took us to the church that night, and we had a beautiful ecumenical worship service, interfaith actually. We had rabbis and imams and Baha'i were also a part of that service. And after the service, after the preaching, I was getting ready to do the benediction, and someone came and whispered in my ear, "Keep singing." I began to sing again and wondered what was going on. And we sang 2 or 3 more rounds of the song. And I was preparing to do the benediction again. And someone came and whispered in my ear, "Keep singing." I sang another couple of rounds of the song. And then I saw the person coming back. And I said, "I can't keep singing. What's going on?" And he explained to me that we were surrounded, that the church was surrounded, and we weren't going to be able to get out. And so he did not want us to dismiss because he thought that people would try to leave, and that was going to be problematic for our safety. And I, being from the South, and Reverend Dr. Cornell West was there as well, when they began to tell us we needed to go out of the back door and out of the alley door, and that they would have cars open for us, I boldly proclaimed, "I don't go out of back doors and I don't go out of alley doors. I came in the front door, I'm leaving out of the front door." They said, "No, Reverend Blackmon, you can't leave out the front door." I said, "I'm going out the front door. That's the way I came in. I'm not afraid." I opened the door, and as far as I could see, I saw torches. They were tiki torches, of course, but hundreds and hundreds of torches. And I could see people mostly wearing khakis and button downs and caps. Some of them said, "Make America Great Again." Some of them said other patriotic type of statements. And they were saying, "Jews cannot replace us. You cannot replace us. Whose streets? Our streets." It was odd to me because "Whose streets? Our streets" is a chant from Ferguson, Missouri. It was odd to me that they were chanting it in the streets of Charlottesville. And I thought maybe just this one time I wouldn't go out the front door and it would be okay if I went out the back or the side. I closed the door. Cornell West was behind me saying, "Oh, come on, sister, we can do it." I said, "No, I don't think we can today." I closed the door and I called Bishop William Barber, who is a good friend of mine, because I saw no media, I saw no security other than the young people who were providing security for us. I told Bishop Barber what was going on, and he said, "Tell me exactly where you are." I told him. He said, "Do not leave. I am sending someone. And when that person gets there, you're to do exactly what they tell you to do." And I don't know how he did it, but within 15 minutes, there was someone by my side who told me that he would be with me until I left that city. Dr. Barber called back and said, "Where's the media?" I said, "No one is here but Katie Couric." Katie Couric was there doing a special on racism in America, ironically. She didn't know about the march. She just happened to be in Charlottesville because of the statues. And I talked with her earlier before the service. I said, "Katie Couric and her team are the only ones here." He said, "Stay by the phone, someone's gonna call you." And within 5 minutes, Joy Reid called from MSNBC. If it had not been for that call, no one would have ever known or seen for themselves the degree of what happened in Charlottesville that they saw. For it was MSNBC that covered that. And they were only there because Joy Reid sent them overnight. What does that have to do with after the election? Well, what happened in Charlottesville was during the last administration. And what it should have been for us was a wake-up call that our nation was in grave trouble and in the midst of a great divide. It certainly was that for me, for many reasons, but most predominantly for the fact that it was the first time in my life I had felt afraid in direct action work. And I realized that the reason I had felt afraid was because something was different in Charlottesville than in Missouri. Something was different in Charlottesville than had been in Birmingham. In Missouri, law enforcement was militarized against protesters in Ferguson. It was as though we were being held hostage in our own city. While we were being held hostage, and it was being streamed all over the world, Palestinian youth who were watching in Palestine what was happening in the streets of Ferguson, began tweeting Ferguson youth and telling Ferguson youth that when the officers do this, it means this. When they make this gesture, this is what's coming next. When they pull this, be prepared for this. They began to teach us over the web how to make homemade gas masks, how to make sure we had the materials we would need to get chemicals off of our bodies. And indeed, they were right. We needed all of those things. In Birmingham, the KKK often marched down the middle of the street in my childhood. They always had on sheets and a hood. And even as a child, I thought it was ridiculous the way people looked with sheets and a hood on. So I was not afraid because I was always standing with people who would protect me. What I realized I feared in Charlottesville was that what I had allowed myself to believe as truth was really a lie. You see, I thought that racism would die out with generations. I actually believed that the integration of our healthcare, of our educational systems, that the integrations of our neighborhoods were bringing us closer together, was allowing us to understand that the color of our skin is just that, the color of our skin, and that we all bleed the same red blood, and that we are all connected even if we don't look alike. I thought that my children and my children's children would usher in a time when racism would begin to diminish in this country. But the people who I faced in Charlottesville were not my age, were not older. They were the age of my children. And they were wearing khakis and not sheets, and button downs and not hoods. And they were driving Benzes and BMWs and Hondas. And friends, in that moment, I had to realize that racism would not die, that it would continue from generation to generation unless we were aggressive about rooting it out. To this day, I have not been able to watch the footage from Charlottesville. Not because I feel that I'm still there, but if I may be honest with you, it's because I don't want to see anybody that I know that was there fighting for a statue, fighting against the dignity of all humankind. And over these past 4 years, I've watched as these divides have grown more and more and more. How many of us ever imagined that we would be a country where children would be forcibly separated from their parents? How many of us ever imagined that we would be so ill prepared for a pandemic that was inevitable to come eventually, that we would not be prepared to protect even the most vulnerable among us? And here we are. And on January 6th, in my opinion, it all came to a head when we found ourselves watching as our nation's capital was under siege based on a lie. So there are things we have to do. And my agenda for doing those things does not differ from the agenda of the Poor People's Campaign. How many of you are familiar with that? There are things that we have to do politically, but there are also things we have to do theologically. And theologically in our churches and our places of worship in our communities of gathering, we must be courageous enough to begin having these conversations, not having conversations that demonize the president that just left. That serves no good purpose. And he too is a child of God. But having conversations about what makes us fearful of one another, what makes us hold on to the things that divide us instead of embracing the things that unite us. How might we live beyond a legacy of white supremacy? And how might we live outside of the boundaries of what white privilege has done to this nation? It occurs to me that one of the reasons perhaps we as a nation, both Black, brown, and white, hang on to the myth of white privilege is because to acknowledge that white privilege is a myth is also means to accept that meritocracy is a lie, that people get what they deserve, that people have what they've earned, because in this country, that is not always true. So I'm hoping that at kitchen tables and dining tables and in chapels and in church and over Zoom calls for right now, that America would begin to have a conversation where people, all people, Black, white, brown, indigenous, immigrants, gay, straight, trans, gender non-conforming, all people can come together and tell where it hurts and listen to one another and move toward one another as all members of the human family. There are some policy agendas that we need to address. The first and primary one is to enact comprehensive, free and just COVID relief, to mandate the collection and mentoring and reporting of the impact of the pandemic by race, ethnicity, income, occupation, and geography, and to prioritize high-risk areas, to distribute COVID testing equitably and COVID vaccine equitably. Those communities that have been the hardest hit should also be prioritized to be served first with the vaccine. Certainly, I mean, after our healthcare workers, we should be taking care of our elderly, and then we should be taking care of the populations that have the most comorbidities. We should also guarantee quality health care for everyone, regardless of their pre-existing conditions. COVID-19 has exposed more to us than a virus. It has exposed to us the fragility of our healthcare system. It has exposed to us our inability to care for the sick in massive numbers. It has exposed to us the danger of a people who cannot have preventative care, which helps create comorbidities that increase their chances of death when viruses such as COVID come. There's absolutely no reason that we should not have health care for all in the United States. Thirdly, I think we need to raise the minimum wage. The current request is $15 an hour. That's a good start, but $15 an hour in a rising economy will not be enough for the long term. It is enough to bring 43 million people out of poverty if we did it tomorrow. So raising the minimum wage to a living wage immediately is one way that we help heal our nation after the election. We also should update the poverty measure. By our standards of poverty, We are underestimating the number of people who live in food insecurity and housing insecurity because they don't have enough money to live. If we update the poverty measure to a living wage, then we increase the number of poor people in this nation to 147 million from 47 million. We should guarantee housing for everyone, expand public and affordable housing, offer rental assistance, stop foreclosures and evictions, especially in light of an economy that has been hit the way ours has, enact a rent freeze, and provide for those not renters, provide for the landlords some relief, because they also deserve to have money as well. We should enact federal job programs to build on investments in infrastructure, public institutions, and climate resistance, energy efficiency, and socially beneficial industries, and jobs in poor and low-income communities. The best way to help someone out of poverty, the best way to help our economic environment, is to ensure jobs for people. We should protect and expand the voting rights and the civil rights. Everybody deserves the right to vote if they are a citizen of this country. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to vote. There's absolutely no empirical evidence that massive voting fraud happens in this nation. Guarantee safe, quality, and equitable public education. Education has been a key out for a lot of people. But when you have neighborhoods that are deprived and public schools that depend on the tax base of those neighborhoods, it is impossible to have equitable public education based on taxes. So what if we were to begin to pool our tax money and every child, no matter where they were, received the same allocation for public education? We need comprehensive and just immigration reform. There needs to be a legal way to become a citizen of the United States. We should value those that are here. And yes, we need some regulations, but it should not be impossible. And we should not have 67,000 people waiting at the border in Mexico, seeking asylum here, being delayed what our country says they are due. We should ensure the rights of all indigenous people. We should value and honor their land. We should protect water rights. We should enact fair taxes. We should use the power of executive orders to reverse the executive orders from the previous administration that have exacerbated systemic racism, poverty, the denial of health care, unjust immigration enforcement, and climate devastation. We should redirect a bloated Pentagon budget towards the priorities that matter. The priorities, yes, of national security, but away from a war economy, and put that money to use to fight COVID and poverty, invest in healthcare, jobs, infrastructure, education, and more. And we should work as the people to hold accountable every elected official. We should not, even if this was a change we wanted, sit back and wait on government to do our work. This is the people's house. We are the people. And no matter who is in power, red or blue, Democrats or Republicans, the system will never work for all the people unless all the people work the system. I'll stop there so we can have some conversation.
Before we start that, however, will you all join me in thanking Reverend Traci Blackmon for a wonderful opening and a way to help bring us into a great conversation. Thank you, Trace. Thank you so very much. And I know that as we gather here, Reverend Molly from the Illinois Conference, who helped think with me about this, said, we really need help in prompting after the election, not in relationship to what happens, but in relationship to who we are. And Traci has really helped frame that and give us a foundation. So I invite those of you who would like to offer a question or a comment to help us engage in a little conversation. And those of you who wish to also on the chat, you could type in. Some of you are doing wonderful thank you notes. Thank you for those great notes. But if you don't feel like jumping in, please type in and I'll read them out for our guest speaker.
Traci.
Yeah.
I'll bring you a question. Recognizing that we're here talking at a university, what particular advice would you have for young adults coming of age, just having maybe voted in their first election, setting on their path for life, figuring out how to be good citizens? What advice might you have?
Thank you so much for that. What I'm finding, Molly, from a lot of young adults, especially those who are engaged in what is happening now, is that they are far ahead of us. They are starting to learn the political landscape, become involved extremely early, and that is benefiting us. One of the things that I admire about what young people are doing, especially in activist work, is they have a mantra that nothing about us without us, and they won't leave anyone behind. So the idea of negotiating policy that just protects some people and not all people is not something I find that young people are interested in. So I know you asked me in the reverse, but what I find is I learn more from them in ways that we can actually engage the system. They have courage, they have resilience, they're not willing to compromise as easily as those of us who are a little bit more comfortable in our lives and are more situated. So I'm saluting them. This is not directly related, but I want to say this because it's, you hear the horror stories when protests happen or when uprisings happen, especially like what happened in Ferguson. But there were some wonderful things that happened with universities there, particularly Washington University and St. Louis University. Washington University and St. Louis University, in their own ways, and those ways were very different, were involved in the unrest in Ferguson in ways that they were trying to redirect some of that energy into positive lanes. One of the things that Washington University did was pay attention to activists who were leading, young activists. Many of these activists were in their 20s then. Some of them were in college and suspended their education because what many people don't know is in Ferguson, when Michael Brown died, there was a protest for 369 days consecutively. So even after the media was gone, people were still out in the streets. They identified from the streets leaders who had potential in their eyes, and they offered them actually a free ride to Washington University, which is a $60,000 a year education. And they gave them support systems to help integrate them into school. Out of the 6 people who were offered that from Washington University, there's only one that I know did not graduate. And I just beam with pride when I think about that. It's only been 6 years since that happened. 3 of them are headed to law school. One of them was already finishing a bachelor's degree when Michael Brown was killed, and is now entering a PhD program in nursing. One of them is doing social work. And I can't remember what the degree of the other person is, but I bring that up not to suggest that Washington University made them brilliant, but that the university took the time to identify brilliance that did not have the means to be educated that way. And I am forever grateful to both Washington University. St. Louis University did so with students as well. I'm just not as familiar with those students. But my point is, universities have a unique role to play in helping to shape in a productive form the outcome of protests, the outcome of agitation with racism and classism. And I'm sure that Elmhurst does its share of this kind of work as well. But I want to lift it up everywhere it is, because there are so many brilliant children who don't have the opportunities available to them to get the undergirding that they need to shine. And those are just examples to me of ways that is shown up.
Can I add, I know that your seminary, Eden Theological Seminary, also stepped up and really tried to help out and work and do a lot of the digging theologically about stuff.
And still does, right?
Yes.
And so now Eden has launched an urban chaplaincy certification program for those who are theologically trained, who want to be out in the street with young people, right? What does that mean in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ? I just accepted an appointment at Eden to be pastor in residence there while I'm living in St. Louis. Yes, educational entities have a large part to play in not just and that's one way of looking at it, but also educational entities have a large place to play in helping people understand the data and do the work and be able to research the history behind where we are right now. So I kudos to every institution that's doing that.
So one of the questions that's here is explaining some of the policy conversation. And I would ask you to lift up the Poor People's Campaign also, because I'm surprised that so few people know about Barbara and all the work that's been going on.
Oh my gosh.
And you know, it's just, it's bedrock for what we need.
So the Poor People's Campaign is something that's very close to the heart of the UCC. It's an initiative based on the Poor People's Campaign that Martin Luther King started, that he never got to finish before he died. And what it shows is that really the undergirding impetus for racism in this country, because race is not a real thing. Race is a social construct. It is not biological or anthropological in its origin. It is something that was fabricated based on difference to allow people to amass great volumes of wealth by having free labor. That's just the bottom line. That's the reason that we have, and I have a whole talk on race, but that wasn't what we were going to talk about today. There's a whole history that shows that historians have now even found out that in the 17th century, enslavement was not even a thing, and Black people were, right? So this was something that was created in order to create cheap and free labor for people who came to North America who did not have the ability to harvest and plant and take care of tobacco, which is a hard crop. Later it was cotton, but it started with tobacco. That's a whole different story. And so the Poor People's Campaign points out very clearly that if people who are economically challenged would come together and work for the advancement of equity in financial realms, that we would indeed begin to address quite a few problems that we have in other realms. And so Dr. William Barber and Liz Theo Harris, Dr. Liz Theo Harris, both graduates of Union, are the co-laborers that lead the Poor People's Campaign. And there are organizations of Poor People's Campaigns in every city, in all 50, not in every city, in every state, and in many of the cities. And so if you just Google www.poorpeoplescampaign.org, you will read all about the history. It started with Moral Mondays in North Carolina, when Dr. Barber would go to the State House with a few people every Monday to protest some issue. And it has grown from there to be a statewide, nationwide campaign to end poverty in this country. It is multiracial, multi-ethnic, and it intersects every area of oppression that there is: race, environment, gender, sexuality. And I count him a prophet of our time.
One of our faculty has agreed with so much and then asked this question: how do we reach out? How do we reach the others? In many ways, how did you get into the conversation with the evangelicals?
You know, I'm starting to question if I'm not progressive enough, because evangelicals keep calling. I feel that I am grateful that I can talk to anyone and that I can see the humanity in the eyes of others. And I pray that I never lose that. And I feel that when we remind ourselves that we are all created in the image of the divine, from the same breath, from the same bloodline spiritually, then we have to see the humanity of one another. And this has been very painful, but it's also a unique opportunity, because we are being forced to create bridges across chasms that are not just across the street or across town, but are across the dinner table.
I know there's a number of ways to ask this, and with thanks for all that you do, but several have said, how do you keep going? Your strength, your spiritual strength.
When I was in Eden, long before I knew this was going to be my life's call, I went on a mission trip to Ghana. And one of the things I love about the United Church of Christ, I haven't always been United Church of Christ, but one of the things I love about the United Church of Christ is our understanding of what it means to do mission work. The United Church of Christ does not go to faraway places and plant churches. We don't go to faraway places and pass out tracts and try to evangelize people as though there is no God before we get there. We understand God to be omnipresent, a God who is present everywhere. And our understanding of mission work is to go to places where people need help and look for what God is already doing there and join in helping the people that God is already doing it with. And I love that about us. In preparation for that trip through Eden, we had to be deconstructed from the traditional words of mission. And in that deconstruction, one of our teachers for that trip had us do this practice of every day. We'd have sessions with her in the morning to talk about where we were going and to learn something about the region and how we would be there. And she would make us ask every day, what is God up to? What is God up to in this place? Every morning for 2 weeks when we were there, that was the question. What is God up to in this place? And I've carried that question with me through all of my ministry. Everywhere I go, I have journals from every place that I've been. I haven't been doing it virtually. So if I ever come to Elmhurst, there'll be a story about you in my journal, because I look for what God is up to in places. And it has never been the case that when I look for what God is up to, that I don't find God working somewhere. And those glimpses give me joy. You cannot sustain resistance work without joy. You just can't. Yes, you're going to have righteous anger. Yes, you're going to be even rageful at times, but you have to have joy. And so what I do every morning, a part of my spiritual practice, is to decide I'm going to look for what God is up to in a place. And I find it. I find it. Even on January 6th, when I was looking at the TV of the Capitol being invaded, I found glimpses of God being up to something. When the newscaster was in the closed chamber and he happened to span to a woman who was trapped in the balcony, who was standing up with her hand lifted, praying for everybody. From the law enforcement officer who took it upon himself to run in a different direction, risking himself to divert attention away from senators who needed to get to safety. I saw God up to something. Everywhere you look, you can find God up to something. It's just a spiritual discipline that keeps me going. And when I get tired, I rest.
Thank
Rest
God.
is holy. Rest is holy. I want to say that oftentimes I go places and people want to know, what can they do? And I want to say before we close that to find out what you can do, you need to look inside first. I have a philosophy that God has many front lines, and the front line for everyone is not out in the streets. If you're not called to be out in the streets, it's okay. There are many front lines. I was a pastor until December 28th. I'm not pastoring anymore because of my schedule. But I had a member at my church, her name was Sandy. I say was because Sandy died a few years ago. But when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Sandy was a member of my church. She was an 85-year-old white woman who had moved from an affluent part of town to our part of town because she was in a nursing home there. That was the only nursing home she could afford. And on her way to the nursing home for the first day, she saw the symbol of the United Church of Christ in front of my church. And she took down the number and she called, said, I'm in a nursing home. I want to come to church. And we began picking up Sandy for church every Sunday and bringing her to church. She was a faithful member. And we love Sandy dearly. When Michael Brown was killed, I pastored a small church, the kind of church where someone has something to say to you in the middle of the worship, they just said it. That kind of small church. And Sandy was very much like that. And in the middle of the protest, in October came, and we always did a coat and hat giveaway in our church in October. We give away 100 new coats and 100 new hats to go with them. And this particular October, Sandy came to me before worship and she said, Pastor, I want to say something during announcements. I said, okay. And I forgot during announcements. So Sandy raised her hand and said, you forgot me. I said, okay, what is it, Sandy? She said, come down, I need you to be on the floor. And I came down to the floor and Sandy came out of the pew and she was pulling behind her one of those grocery carts you have, like if you can walk to the grocery store in your neighborhood. And all I could see was plastic bags and yarn, different color yarn. And when she got up to me, She said, I want to tell you, Pastor, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of seeing you in the street fighting for justice. And if I were younger, I would be in the street with you. But I've gotten too old for that now. But I wanted to do something. She said, so I remembered when I was in the nursing home. She had gotten out of the nursing home. That's another story. But she said, I remember when I was in the nursing home, my roommate taught me how to crochet. And I went and got my crochet needles and I got my book and refreshed my memory. And I've been crocheting since August. And I've crocheted 100 hats and scarves to go with our 100 coats. And what you don't know is when I was younger, I was a math teacher. And I count, even though I can't march with you, I've marched 5 miles with my hands. And I remember that story. And I tell people often, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. Just do what you can do. Do it where you can do it. We need somebody on every front line, and you have a role to play. One more such story, and I will let you go. In Charlottesville, you saw all of the pictures of the rioters. You saw protesters that were standing in front of them. But there were people who lived in Charlottesville who didn't want to be in the streets. They didn't want to be engaged in anything that might turn violent. Lots of them were white. They wanted it to be known that this was not who they were, but that wasn't the way they knew how to do it. So many of the white people in Charlottesville who lived in the suburbs drove into the area where the university was and the church was. They drove there, listen to this. They drove there Friday morning. They used their church buses to follow them in their cars. They parked their cars in all the close parking spaces to where the protest was going to be. And then they took the shuttles back home. Their way of protesting was to say, we may not be able to stop you from coming, but by George, we can make you walk a long way before you get there. And I love that story of protest in a different kind of way. So don't let anybody shame you for how you show up. Just do what you can do. Just do what you can do.
Beloved, will you join me? I think we all would agree, where has God been tonight? God has been with Reverend Traci Blackmon here with us. Thank you, Traci, so very much. Thank you, beloved.
Thank you, Kim and Karen, and I saw somebody else's name I saw here.
We've had a lot of great folk here. And I want to make sure we say thank you to Reverend Molly from the conference.
Yes, Molly, thank you.
And we want to say thank you to Dr. Stephen Ray, the president of Chicago Theological Seminary, who was behind this, and Michael Shudders for the DuPage NAACP, who helped push this also. We want you here on campus someday to be one of, you've already started a tradition, you're part of it, a visiting scholar of this United Church of Christ and this college, now university. Thank our president, Troy Van Aken. Beloved, Traci, will you let me offer a prayer, please?
Please.
Let us close. For the gifts that we have been touched with tonight, in the love, grace, beauty, justice, and strength of this wonderful woman. For the Reverend Traci Blackmon and all that she is, strengthen her and bless her on her journey, gracious one, that we here in the Illinois Conference and at Elmhurst University might find strength for the journey, love that comes from joy and hope born of struggle. But give us this night with thankfulness and take us with joy and pleasure into this rest of this time for tonight and into the work that we are each given. Bless each here, Almighty One, for you have given us our United Church of Christ, Elmhurst University, and each other. Take us now with hope. This we pray in your holy name. Amen.
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 Thank you all for coming. There are many other events, as you know, coming that we're hosting here on campus. But for right now, thank you, Reverend Traci Blackmon. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Blessings and strength to you. Grace and love. Go in peace.